to Red Cedar Radar. This is our recap episode of Michigan State's game against Rutgers. I'm joined by Paul and Brendan, some familiar faces to the pod. We're going to kind of be breaking down the great start that MSU had against Rutgers and then the eventual fall of everything at the end of the game in the fourth quarter. Then we're going to talk, positives and negatives moving forward for the rest of the season. And at the end of our episode, we're going to talk about basketball, which is very exciting and hopefully a positive note to end our little recap here. How are you guys today?
Doing pretty good, Sydney. Would have preferred a little better outcome last night, but other than that, doing pretty good.
What about you, Brendan? Go ahead.
I'm doing good. Other than the emotional roller coaster of the football game yesterday, doing good.
I have I guess I should say I have something to admit to both of you. I started making the recap little sheet that we go off every time before the game was over. And I was just thinking to myself, oh, this episode's going to be so great. Like, we're going to talk about a win. And so maybe it's my fault that everything fell apart. I would take that blame, but also I think there's other things to blame as well. And we'll talk about that really soon. But for now, I'll own it.
I think I saw Paul tweet out that whenever he was in the bathroom, Michigan State did something good. So I don't think he was in the bathroom.
Yeah, I tried, man.
I'm gonna also...
Yeah, part of the fourth quarter, I just was... No.
Paul, you should have just moved in there, taken all of your stuff and...
Yeah, I did consider it. I did try it a little bit. I'm not saying I'm not superstitious. I will claim that I have a pair of snowman-themed pajama pants that I'm pretty sure is responsible for at least two of Izzo's Final Fours. But yeah, that nothing was working in the fourth quarter yesterday.
Yeah, unfortunate. Not even your pajama pants.
No, they've lost their power.
So let's just jump right in. MSU lost their game on the road to Rutgers, 27-24. It seemed like they had it in the bag, and they played well. They had a couple really good drives that I was really feeling positive about. And then errors and silly mistakes kind of just started to pile up, and they couldn't come back for that. Rutgers capitalized. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was maybe a little bit of a positive. Caden Hauser started the game, his first start. They had kind of alluded to that during the week. Harlan Barnett had kind of teed off a little bit that they were kind of going to try something new. Initial thoughts on Caden Hauser starting. Brendan, how about you give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought he played well. He didn't really push the ball downfield too much, only averaged 4.6 yards per pass, but he didn't really need to. Michigan State had a couple of slow, methodical, really commanding drives. The opening drive that they had and the opening drive of the second half that they have, I thought were really impressive. And Caden Hauser looked like he was in control of that offense. So I thought he played well. I think he should be the starter for the rest of the season, but we'll see how he does against Michigan here.
Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, I was definitely skeptical that Hauser was going to frankly look any better than Kim. And so having watched, the first three quarters of the game, I was very pleasantly surprised. I thought that Hauser, he just seemed more comfortable in the pocket. I think Kim would tend to get happy feet and try to exit the pocket a little sooner than he should. Hauser definitely looked more poised to me. I also, and I'm curious your take on this, I felt the offensive line played a little better yesterday as well. Hauser seemed to have a little bit more time. The running game, certainly early on, I thought looked a little better. So everything just seemed to be clicking more so than it had maybe to this point this season, certainly against Power 5 opponents. So yeah, I think that Hauser definitely earned the right to have more playing time. And it definitely looks like he is the quarterback of the future. And it's unfortunate for Kim because it's, somebody's got to be a winner. Somebody has to be a loser. But certainly I thought Hauser's play was a bright spot yesterday.
Yeah, I agree. And what you said about the line, I felt like he was comfortable. Like I felt how like Hauser was comfortable, and that was because he had so much time and the offensive line was playing better. So I agree 100%. That was kind of one of my points that I wanted to say. And going along with what you and Brendan said, I think he has to be the guy going forward just because he's the younger guy and the program is going to start turning over here really soon. And I think you want to put as much playing time into a guy that is going to be the future rather than, like you said, unfortunately, Noah Kim, who I just don't think is the fit right now. Anything else to say about Hauser before we just kind of jump into the game in general?
I mean, 3 total touchdowns, impressive. He had 2 passing, 1 rushing. I thought he looked good running the football as well. I thought they should have given him a couple more QB draw opportunities, especially on that 4th and 1. Maybe have him sneak it or QB draw. But yeah, I thought he looked good in the running game.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, the once again failed fourth and short play. I mean, I'm definitely an advocate of the just sort of do the quarterback sneak with one or two guys pushing from behind. I think against Iowa was frankly the first time I ever remember seeing that not work, and that was because just Iowa packed like half of the defense like right over the center. I just don't see why you don't try that every time because it should work 95% of the time at least. But I'm not the offensive coordinator, so
Right, they don't pay us that much.
yeah, not yet. There'll be an
Right,
opportunity soon, I think.
right. Right. Okay, let's just jump into the game in general. I have a couple points that I thought were good takeaways. But before I start, do you guys have anything that you wanted to say right off the bat about the game in general?
It felt a little, though, I think I'm a little more experienced in this, but it was a little bit of a John L. Smith-esque collapse at the end of such that we have not seen recently. So perhaps I was a little more emotionally prepared for it than other fans. Um, but that was kind of the feel. I mean, even in when the botched punt that led to the first score, I found myself checking that like the ESPN percentage of victory, and see like how much danger are we really in, and it was like at 90%, and it's like I should be feeling much better than I'm not 90% confident that they're not going to blow this, and so that was just the emotional experience that I had through the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I know. Every error that kept piling up, I feel like I started to sweat a little bit more. Like, okay, that's fine. Like, we'll come back. No problem, no problem. And then other things kept happening, and I was a little bit more like, okay, we'll come back. Like, no problem. And then at the end, I just was crying and couldn't come back from that. But I just, so I guess my question is, what can you do to clean up those errors?
Well, I would say that I think the errors are correctable. And I think there is some reason for optimism, which I think we'll touch on later. But when it comes to special teams errors, these are things that can be corrected. I mean, a fumbled snap in the rain for a punter, that's going to happen. It's bad. It's somewhat bad luck. I mean, especially since they'd already punted it once and then the penalty actually forced them to punt it a second time. In the special teams errors, I mean, Tyrell Henry's muffed kickoff return, you're not going to see that very often. And then there was also, I believe, 2 fumbles with wide receivers catching the ball, taking a couple steps and dropping it. And again, these are things that you have to you can chalk up to a little bit of bad luck. Now MSU had a little bit of good luck too. As others have pointed out, we got a few breaks, and some of those pass interference calls were a little generous. I think there was a targeting call that was potentially a little generous. I mean, I can see in the replay why that rule was, or why that ruling was made, but in real time I never thought for a second that would be targeting. So I think that if we focus on the good things that happened in the first 3 quarters of the game, and sort of hold on to that, I think the other errors are correctable. And I think Rutgers is a good team. So, the fact that the Spartans were in control of that game for a large percentage of it is a good thing, in, the context of not very good ending.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I think we maybe have lost Brendan, but I think we'll just keep going here. Um, I Even though MSU was coming in as an underdog, I really thought that it was a very winnable game. And the first 3 quarters proved to me that it was a very winnable game, that the Spartans could do it. So I think you're exactly right. some of them are bad luck and the weather and things, but I feel like the other things, like you said, are rare and maybe can be addressed and, cleaned up for the future. So I feel like, and I think you feel similarly about this, we really saw some things that will, I don't know, we have some hard games, or they have some hard games coming up, but I saw some things that could lead to some positives in the games going forward. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, especially since Hauser, frankly, in the offense looked a lot better than I was expecting.
Yes.
I was not expecting that performance. I mean, I thought that the Spartans would lose by double digits yesterday because as much optimism as there was for making the quarterback change, I didn't think we were going to see anything better than what we had seen the last 3 weeks, and we did. So that is certainly encouraging. Um, Now the run defense I thought could have been a little better. I thought it started strong, but then the dam kind of broke in the fourth quarter, and I think that was potentially just kind of that adrenaline dump when I don't want to say that the team was overconfident and maybe felt that they had the game in the bag, but I mean, these players are human, and
Yeah.
I think that when the I think the analogy that Harlan Barnett made was once the avalanche started, it was hard to stop, and I think that that's true. um, it is hard to kind of refocus and turn it back on um, when things start going negatively, especially on the road and especially in bad weather.
Yeah.
Um, I mean that fourth quarter, the final drive that Rutgers had, I think it lasted over 7 minutes, and they didn't pass the ball once. I mean, there's on some level no excuse for not being able to stop that, but they couldn't, and they just milked the clock. It was like being choked by an anaconda there in the last second half of the fourth quarter, and
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point also, this team has had obviously so many struggles. You get up in 3 quarters and it's a very winnable game. Maybe, like you said, like you get complacent because you haven't felt this in so long, and this is very much a much needed win that you're kind of basking in those feelings, and then things turn around and like you said, it's hard, like the avalanche is hard to stop it. So I felt like there was a little bit of that too, like the guys were finally maybe breathing a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, we can put something together, like we've been running more smoothly on offense, and then just got a little bit complacent, which in the scheme of everything that has happened this season, although you don't want to see that, I can understand that point of, you know they're human, they're college athletes. Yeah.
And in situations like that, having strong leadership is helpful. And obviously, the coaching situation has been
Right.
unstable, so that doesn't help.
Yep.
Um, so it's
Yeah.
understandable.
Yes. All right. Technical difficulties resolved. Brendan is back with us. Go ahead and share some of your points from the game in addition to what Paul and I kind of just chatted about.
Yeah, I heard what Paul said. He made a good point. Like, yeah, fumbles are gonna happen. It's in the rain, so it's hard to hold on to the ball. But it just happens far too often with this team. I mean, yesterday you look 5 fumbles. This team had 5 fumbles. I think they only lost 2, but so they coughed up the football 5 times. That's just too much. And when you let that happen, and then can't stop that snowball effect, that snowball from rolling down the hill, that's when they can let the other team get back in the game. That's exactly what happened yesterday. This is kind of a disturbing stat, but turnovers lost. Michigan State is second to last in FBS in turnovers lost. They've lost 15 turnovers. That's not turnover margin. That's turning the ball over 15 times. Only 2 teams worse are Bowling Green and Colorado State, who have 16 turnovers this season. So Michigan State, one of the worst in the country at turning the ball over. And the defense just ran out of gas in that fourth quarter because they were put on the field so much. Michigan State ran 10 plays in the fourth quarter, as our publisher David Hardens pointed out. Hauser got sacked on that first play, then the fumbled punt, which caused that Rutgers touchdown to make it 24-13. Hauser had an incompletion. Carter ran for a 2-yard loss. Hauser a 1-yard completed pass, punt. Carter 1-yard gain. Hauser 2-yard gain. Hauser incomplete pass, punt. So 10 plays in the fourth quarter. The defense is gassed. I mean, that's what let Rutgers back into the football game.
Yeah. Yeah. It just was horrendous, and I'm a little bit worried about the games that we have coming up. What are you guys' thoughts on how the Spartans will do going forward for the rest of the season based off that performance?
Well, I think, I mean, obviously there's 3 games left on the schedule against very good teams. And I think as we're recording this, the line's not out for next week's game against Michigan. I'm guessing it's going to be at least 20 points. Um, and the line will be similar for Ohio State and Penn State. So, obviously those are going to be 3 very difficult games. The likelihood of winning any of them is not very good. But I still think that based on what we saw, there's reasons to expect that at least the Spartans will put up a few decent to good performances with the remaining, I think, 6 games that are on the schedule. There are 3 very winnable games left. I mean, the Minnesota is not looking very strong. It's a road game again, but I think that we could see a win there. Nebraska and Indiana are also both winnable games. I think the Spartans will even be favored in at least one of those, if not both. So those games are winnable. Now, the bad news is that yesterday's game was also winnable, and they didn't get that win. Although I think that by some measure, the game against Rutgers is more challenging than those other 3 that I mentioned. And I do think that the Spartans will play well in one or all of those games and potentially get a victory. Now the question is, can Michigan State be competitive in one of those 3 other big games? Because I still think, the ideal would be to still get to 6 wins somehow, and they can't do that without upsetting one of those big dogs in the Big Ten East. Um, and I am going to sort of put on my optimist hat here and talk a little bit about next week's game because, I mean, it is a big game. It's a rivalry game. Michigan looks very good. You could make the argument that they are the number 1 team in the country, and I think, certainly looking at what Georgia has done, and again, kind of failing to cover miserably yesterday against Vanderbilt, who is not very good, that I think you could certainly make the argument the Wolverines are the best team in the country, as sort of distasteful as that is. Um, but at the same time, it's a home game, it's a night game, and I think that um, having Mark D'Antonio on the sidelines is kind of kind of secret weapon, perhaps, because if anybody in recent history can get the Spartans motivated and get them peaking at the right time, it's Coach D'Antonio. So I think that there could be a little bit of D'Antonio magic left. I mean, we didn't see him on the sidelines at all yesterday, which I thought was interesting. I assume he's still around. I think that the camera just didn't catch him, but I'm curious if he's got a few more tricks left up his sleeve. Um, Now, do I think Michigan State's going to win next week? No, but I do think I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, based on the numbers that I said, it'd be sort of like a 15 seed beating a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's kind of the level of probability that we're dealing with. I think the odds of beating Michigan are higher than the odds of Urban Meyer being MSU's next coach. I'll say that. Um, and I would also say that Michigan has started slow the last few weeks. Now they've absolutely steamrolled folks in the second half, but I could imagine a scenario where next week doesn't go so badly, because if Michigan starts slow and if MSU comes out like gangbusters, and there's a chance that they will. I think they're going to play hard, and if they can avoid some of these correctable mistakes, if they can stay focused, we could see something much like the national semifinal, where TCU kind of jumped on Michigan early, and Michigan kind of made some mistakes, and then the Wolverines will start to press. That's possible, um, because I think the other aspect of this is the fact that MSU has had such a tough season so far. Um, that tends to have an interesting psychological effect on the Wolverines, because they're going to want to humiliate MSU point blank. I mean, they tried to run up the score last year, and frankly, they couldn't do it, which I thought was kind of amusing. They're going to try to do the same thing. They're going to try to win 77 to nothing, and I don't blame them. I would do the same thing if the shoe were on the other foot, and in fact, we have. If you remember some of you might not have been alive for the 2000 Mateen Cleaves Senior Day on the basketball court, but we put 100 on them, and it was glorious. They're going to try to do the same thing, and as they should in a rivalry. But sometimes if that also can cause a team to press. So I think that there is a scenario where it doesn't go so badly. I mean, I think that in 2016, I think MSU had a much worse team that was very competitive in that rivalry game. And, I think they wound up losing by 9, but, that game was close. That was a one-score game in the fourth quarter. And, it could have gotten very interesting if also you get a couple good bounces. Now, I think MSU would clearly need to win the turnover battle to make it interesting. Um, we haven't seen any evidence to suggest that that will happen, but it could. I mean, turnovers tend to be kind of random. So if you want the case for optimism next week, that's what it looks like. Do I think MSU will keep it within 4 touchdowns? Most likely not. But there is a path where, we could have a good weekend next weekend. You never know.
So, all's that to say, if you're going to the game, do not sell your tickets to a Michigan fan. If I personally find out that you do that, I will show up at your house and yell at you. So, do not do that. Keep your tickets, keep the faith, and go to the game. Um, because Paul might be right. And if Paul is right, we'll have him back on the recap for next weekend and we'll just like cheer and scream and like be so happy. And that would be amazing. Brendan, don't say anything that contradicts Paul. You have to fall in line with this like maybe crazy optimistic train that we're on because I'm like going full throttle. Do you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I know by tomorrow that Sydney's going to convince herself that Michigan State's going to win this game outright. So I'm actually just going to help that narrative. So here, I'll paint you a picture of how they have to how they could win. It's a turnover battle. Now, nothing suggests that they're going to win the turnover battle. Nothing that we've seen suggests that they're going to win the turnover battle against Michigan. So Michigan's been playing really clean football. They have their best shot at winning a national championship in a long time. So it's a really good team. Michigan is a really good team this season. A lot of veterans. So Michigan State, I think, key number one is they have to win the turnover battle. They have to get stops on defense. I think they're gonna come out and play with fire. I think they're gonna be pumped to play. It's a night game at home against your rival, and I mean, players are gonna be mad about last year too. Remember the tunnel incident? Remember they lost? What was it, like 29-7? So it wasn't super competitive last year. Yeah, they forced a lot of field goals, but still Michigan was in control for most of that football game. So I think they're gonna come out motivated. The question is, can they sustain that? I don't know. Can I think they can keep it close for 1 or 2 quarters, but Michigan, like we've seen, they got off to a slow start against Indiana, but they really pulled away and dominated them late second quarter and then into the second half. Did the same thing with Minnesota, did the same thing with Rutgers. So Michigan's a team that, yeah, they're a little bit slow to start, but they really kick it in high gear late in the second quarter and into the third and fourth quarter. So can Michigan State be competitive with them in the third and fourth? That's what I'm curious to find out. I lean towards no, but that's why they play the football game.
Yeah, I agree with those points because we've seen, I mean, with Iowa and with Rutgers now, that they can't keep it together late in the game. And I think that's kind of a perfect storm maybe against Michigan, who has been kicking it into gear at the end of the game and really putting their opponents away. So it will be very interesting. I'm excited for the game. We'll see. I think it's supposed to be kind of rainy weather. So if you're going to the game, bring your poncho. Are you going to be in the press box, Brendan, for that game?
I will be. So no poncho for
Okay.
me. I'll be nice and dry.
I'll be jealous. That's all right. Paul, will you be going to the game or are you going to be watching from your comfortable, warm couch at home?
No, I will be watching from the comforts of my home, or at least someone's home, and I will
Okay.
likely have a beverage or two with me,
Yeah.
which is probably a good way to go.
It's necessary. Yeah, of course.
Um, I will also comment that, if we're riding the optimism train and I'm the conductor, which I am, um, we do also have to think that, against Maryland, MSU dominated the box score. They could have, with a little bit different luck. I believe there were 5 turnovers in that game. If that, can be eliminated, then there's a good chance they win that game. I think MSU was the better team than Iowa for 3 quarters last week, and I mean, as of this weekend, Iowa is now in control of the Big Ten West. I think, the numbers I ran this morning say they have about a 66% chance to make it to Indianapolis, where they will get absolutely steamrolled by somebody because they've already shown they can't play with Penn State. So, and that's what their starting quarterback. And then this last game against Rutgers, I think MSU for 3 quarters was not just the better team; they were the much better team. So, I mean, there is a universe out there where MSU is 5-1, and then the conversation about this coming week is much different, with honestly not changing that many plays. I mean, probably, maybe 10 plays, but it's not like they were outclassed in those 3 games. They just kind of crumbled at the end. And, we haven't seen evidence that they won't crumble in the end, but, a rivalry can place, strange things happen. We've seen it many times. But I believe if MSU were to win next week, it would probably be, based on the spread, the biggest upset so far this season,
Yeah,
based on what I'm
that.
guessing the spread will be.
Okay, so let's move on from football and talk about basketball, my favorite topic. It's coming soon. I can almost taste it. Um, recently, Big Ten media days for basketball happened when MSU football was on their bye week. And Paul and Brendan, were you both in attendance, or was it
We
just Paul?
both no, we both were there for the media event that was in East Lansing 2 weeks ago, and then there was
Okay,
a Big Ten wide Big Ten media days in Minneapolis this past week, and we weren't able to send anybody to that. But Brendan and I
okay,
were there in East Lansing about a week and a half ago.
okay, yeah. Talk me through kind of what amazing things Tom Izzo had to say about the team and kind of the outlook for the season at this point.
Well, I think we'll start with Izzo, because the Izzo basically came out and gave about an hour long press conference where he kind of went through the whole roster and kind of his thoughts for the season. And he had I would describe it, he has a certain glint in his eye about this team. And I mean, I think it's natural for any head coach to have a glint in their eye this time of year, but there just seemed to be a little bit something extra. He was in rare form. He was actually quite entertaining, I think, for that full hour. And if you just look at the way this roster is constructed, there's reason for optimism, because you have that kind of magical blend of experienced seniors, and I think there are basically four seniors and a junior that all have seen significant playing time, especially ones on the perimeter. But then you also have a large number of talented young players, freshmen or underclassmen. And I shouldn't speak out of turn saying that this is statistically significant, but I think if you look at some of the makeup of the last 15 or 20 national champions, they've had that kind of mix of experienced leadership but also talented freshmen. And so I think this mix is almost ideal for the Spartans to make a long run. And Izzo wasn't really afraid of talking about that. But some of the other things that he said, other than going through the roster, is that one of the rallying cries for his teams have traditionally been, win the Big Ten and make a Final Four. And apparently he told a story about how one of his assistants had questioned him of like, well, why don't you ever talk about winning the national title? And he was like, well, I don't want to put too much pressure on the team. And, growing up, it was really the Final Four was almost more important than who won the national title. And so I just haven't really emphasized it. And so he kind of owned that. He's like, maybe some of our, lack of success making it, after we get to the final weekend is on me. And so he started talking about the national title a little bit more openly, as did his players. And just from talking to some of the guys, and we had the opportunity to, I think, speak to every single player on the roster. Quite honestly, they brought them out in 8-foot tables in the mezzanine of Breslin, and we had a chance to talk to anybody we wanted to for a solid hour or longer, and they kind of came in shifts. So we had quite a bit of time to ask those players questions, and a lot of them did talk about um, national title aspirations, which I think everybody in that building has, and I think most of the fans have, because we are experienced enough fans. We know what success and failure looks like, and often what the precursors are. So this team definitely has that ceiling. Whether they get there, I think, is another question. And I think even Izzo, despite his optimism, he did give a lot of kind of caveats of what might go wrong, and a lot of it had to do with team chemistry. He said that he's got a lot of depth, and having a lot of depth is good in October, but what's that going to look like once January hits and the roster starts getting tight, and people's the people in each individual player's circle, their parents, their friends start getting in their ear. In this modern day and age, if somebody has a bad practice, what does that do to the chemistry? It's hard to say. Um, so he's realistic. He knows how hard it is to win the national title. But I think that is his goal, and I think he is very driven to get that second title and the third for Michigan State, because that would put MSU in a little bit different echelon relative to other teams. So there's a lot of optimism, and I'll
Anything to
stop
add,
there.
Brendan?
Yeah, like Paul said, Izzo talked for about an hour. He had a lot of good things to say. And I think, yeah, he this season a second national title would really cement his legacy as one of the best college basketball coaches in the country in history. So, yeah, he's already we know he's a Hall of Fame level head coach, but one national championship, but another one that would put him into another stratosphere. And I think he has the team to do it. Like Paul said, he knows he has a great mix of veterans with young talent. The team knows that. Izzo knows that. The assistant coaches know that. So he's got a really good, talented roster. And talking to some of the players, they seem motivated. They know what the goal is. I mean, you see in the practice facility, the Final Four logo is plastered everywhere. And at the Izzone campout, I saw pictures. They had a drone show with the Izzone campout. Was like it's a campout for all the student section members, the Izzone, and they had a drone show. And in the drone show, they had the logo of the Final Four in the sky. So the team knows what the goal is. The fans know what the goal is. It's getting to Arizona in the Final Four. And some of the players that stood out to me when talking to them, Jackson Kohler seems really motivated this season. Uh, I think he's going to have a big year. Jeremy Fears is also a guy to watch out for. He's got some bounce. I was at Michigan State Madness the other night, last Friday. He can dunk. He's got some bounce. He's a great leader. He has Mateen Cleaves like leadership, is what Izzo said at the press conference. So that's high praise. I mean, you don't get that praise very often. So Fears, Kohler, Booker is another guy. He's soft spoken, but he's ultra motivated as well. He's a guy that's hitting the weight room hard. He's on the skinnier side now because he's so tall coming out of high school. He said he didn't really lift a ton in high school, but now he's really kicking it into high gear. So expect him to have a big season here. Expect him to gain weight if he stays here in college. Obviously, I mean, if he gets to the NBA, if he goes one and done, we'll see. But I think Michigan State's got a really talented team.
Yeah, there just seems like the buzz around the team about those new guys, but I think something that's getting lost a little bit that Paul brought up is like how important it is that Izzo kept those guys that are those senior leaders on. Because you can have great freshmen coming in, but they don't know what it's like to play Big Ten basketball or in the tournament. And they need those older guys around to kind of guide them through that whole process. Because, once it becomes, gets closer to March, that's a whole new game. I mean, a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of playing. And I feel like having those older guys stick around really means that they're bought into what Izzo is planning for this year. And I think that also goes into that team chemistry thing that you brought up, Paul. I feel like they wouldn't have stuck around if Izzo hadn't put it to them in a way that, means that they're going to stick together as a group and go as far as possible. So I'm very excited if I haven't said 8 million times already. Um, Anything else to add about Michigan State Madness, Brendan, since you were there?
Yeah, it was a fun
I know it's
event.
more a fanfare, but
I'll, Yeah, it was like a Friday the 13th theme, so Halloween themed. All the players, men's and women's team dressed up. They had their WWE like entrances with music there. So it was a fun event. Men's team put on a show. They had scrimmages. Women's team had a 3-point contest. Men's team had a dunk contest. So Cohen Carr, as you saw from social media, you probably could guess he won the dunk contest. So a lot of fans got their first taste of a Cohen Carr dunk in person, which was pretty cool to see. Xavier Booker was also in the dunk contest. Jane Akins and Carson Cooper also competed. So it was a fun event. Izzo's goal was to bring the community together, and they filled a lot of the Breslin centers. The lower bowl was pretty full. Upper bowl probably about quarter of the way full. So it was a great event for the community to come together.
okay, to kind of close out our conversation about basketball, Paul, any more points about what you heard from Izzo, kind of going forward, what you think is going to happen for the season?
Well, I think that one thing to keep in mind, and I think there's an open question about how many more years Izzo has, and he's in his upper 60s now. Um, it's really hard to tell how many more seasons we have, and so that kind of makes this season maybe a little bit higher stakes because this does seem to be his best chance in a while to add to that resume, and that resume is already very impressive. I mean, he's getting very close to having the record for the most Big Ten titles. He already has the record for the most Big Ten tournament titles, and he's really just behind Bob Knight as far as very clearly the best Big Ten coach in history. And I think that chasing some of those records is maybe something he won't admit, but I think that's something that's very important to him. And so I think that he's given indications that he has no plans of hanging it up anytime soon. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean 2 years? Does it mean 4 years? Does it mean 10 years? We've seen coaches like Jim Boeheim at Syracuse coach well into their 70s. And speaking of Boeheim, I think the other thing to keep in mind that may be motivating Izzo is that we've seen a lot of these high-profile coaches retire over the last few years. I mean, we saw Coach K retire. We saw Roy Williams at North Carolina retire. Jim Boeheim is now basically done. So Izzo is now part of that kind of old guard, I would say, where he's is basically now um, that kind of chairman of um, of college coaches. I mean, he's somewhat been in that role for a while, but now he's kind of the undisputed graybeard in the room, and I think he might relish that role a bit. And I think that he now maybe sees that opportunity where because everybody knows Coach Izzo had a tough time beating Krzyzewski, and honestly, he had a tough time beating Roy Williams in the tournament, which was frustrating because I think that Izzo is clearly a better coach than Roy Williams. He just lacked the talent sometimes to take him out and had some kind of bad timing. And of course, there's still guys like Bill Self around, and so he can continue to go toe to toe with coaches like that. But I mean, even coaches like Jay Williams Jay Wright, I'm sorry, from Villanova is retired. So I think that on some level, the playing field is a little bit more open for Coach Izzo, and I think that that made to him seem like an opportunity to kind of close out his career in a very positive way and maybe add to that trophy case in Breslin. So I think that very much does motivate him. And it's I don't want to say that he's going to coach till he dies unless he gets that second national title, but stranger things have happened. So I think we're going to see him for a while, and I think he's going to have that fire because he sees that opportunity that he can take advantage of.
Yeah, I think he recently give an interview to say like that he's a lifelong coach, like this is what he's going to be doing forever, something along those lines, which made it kind of match up with your thoughts there as well. Um, Michigan State basketball is starting their season a little earlier than normal with a charity exhibition game that's happening on October 29th. The Spartans are going to be taking on Tennessee to benefit Maui. I think, is it all the proceeds from the game are going to Maui to support like their relief fund there? I think that's what I read. That game will be happening in the Breslin Center. And I'm excited just to kind of see what the Spartans have to offer this early, in the year. We don't haven't seen them play too much. A little practice, a little dunking here and there at Michigan State Madness, but I'll be curious to see how they look on the court. So I'm excited.
Yeah, as far as that exhibition with Tennessee, I find this game pretty intriguing because I think most fans will know that MSU played in an exhibition down in Knoxville against Tennessee last year that was closed. And there were some intel coming in about how competitive it was, and I think there was like an image somewhere that showed Kohler and Carson Cooper playing at the same time, and everybody was blown, their minds were blown by that. So this is definitely something that has been in the works for a while. But I think the fact that it's open this year kind of changes the game a little bit. And Izzo actually mentioned that briefly during the Michigan State media event of how they almost have to take it more seriously now because it is going to be televised. And while this is a very positive event with all the proceeds going to the Maui wildfire relief, it does sort of change the calculus a bit because if it's a closed scrimmage, it kind of doesn't matter what happens. Like you can tinker with lineups. You could even do like situational things. The playbook is very open, and certainly intel will get out about how players might have played or how the teams looked or who won, but it doesn't really matter. And I think that gives the coaches much more freedom and flexibility. But now that it's going to be a televised kind of spectacle, you have to be a little bit more careful. So I'm kind of curious how they're going to approach this. And Izzo made some kind of vague comment that him and Coach Rick Barnes, who's another kind of graybeard in the coaching profession, Izzo and Barnes have you know gone against each other and are good friends for many years. Um, but because it is televised, they can't do some of those maybe more situational things. And he even mentioned that he had talked to Coach Barnes about things that they could do. And I do kind of wonder if they're going to do something to the format that might make it less game-like. And I made this point on the message board a few weeks ago that there is a risk, I would say, to both teams because, you know, people are going to be watching this. I mean, the AP voters, the coaches voters, they're going to be watching this. People on the selection committee might be watching this. And even though it's an exhibition, what happens you can't unsee it. So, I'm a little bit either I guess then that could go two ways. If Michigan State looks very good, that could potentially help them. If Michigan State looks kind of shaky, or if there's something that doesn't go so well, then that could have a little bit of a negative impact. And it should be very small, but I will mention that the stakes are potentially a little higher than usual this year for the NCAA tournament. And far be it for us to talk about March, in mid-October, but there's a path for Michigan State to go through. I believe Indianapolis in the first two rounds. If they were to advance, there's a regional final location in Detroit this year at Little Caesars Arena. So that's going to be a pretty major prize. Now, the problem is that Purdue is also supposed to have a very good team. Both Michigan State and Purdue are listed in the top five nationally. And only one of those teams is going to wind up in Detroit. You can be almost assured of that, or in that Midwest region. And so, Purdue and Michigan State, unless one of the teams is significantly better or significantly worse than we think, they're going to be battling for potentially that number one or potentially number two seed in that region. That's looking a long ways ahead, but this is the reality. And so, if it's a razor thin margin between those teams at the end of the season, um, will something like that exhibition make a difference? No, probably not, because Purdue and Michigan State can settle these things on the court. But Michigan State only plays at Purdue this year, so that's a bit of a problem. And let's say Michigan State and Purdue meet in the Big Ten championship game, an hour before Selection Sunday. Does the committee even take that into consideration? History has shown us that they don't, which is another story for another day. But all these things matter, and so that does make me a little bit curious about how this exhibition with Tennessee is going to go. But I think it'll be a lot of fun, and so that's positive for fans. But I think from a team standpoint, maybe it would have been better for it to still be a closed exhibition.
Yeah, good points. Good points. Thinking ahead to the rest of the season, I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Anything else that anybody wants to say about basketball before we move on briefly to hockey? I think we've covered not too much yet to talk about for basketball. We're still a little early in the process, but we'll have more basketball coming soon. Brendan, I think you were there for the hockey game. Is that right? Or for the hockey games at home the other week? Were you in the student section? I think maybe.
Yeah, I was there. So they played Lake Superior State last Saturday, October 7th, and Sunday, October 8th. Won both of them. Sweep of Lake Superior State to open the season. One on Saturday, 5-2. One on Sunday, 4-2. So I thought they looked good. I think the team has more talent than they did last year. Better depth, uh, puck movements better, more scoring threats, I would say, as well. You can just tell that there's a lot of raw talent on this team, and there's a lot of young talent too. So they're gonna take their bumps and bruises. Like on Thursday night, October 12th, they lost at Air Force. So they're going to lose maybe some games that they probably shouldn't lose. Like you shouldn't give up 6 goals to Air Force. I know it's on the road. Uh, road ice is harder than winning on home ice. So tough loss, but still, I think this team's going to take its bumps and bruises, but they got a lot of talent. And they came back and beat Air Force on Friday night 5-3. So the team's 3-1 coming back home.
It really seems like coming off last season, they have a lot of momentum to build on. And it just seems like Adam Nightingale is the guy that really is bringing things together for them. I think he was a great hire, and I think it's taken some time, obviously, because it always does to build. But I just see a lot of positives from him and a lot of upsides of him being the head coach, and I'm super kind of excited for what they're going to do this season. I think there's a lot of there's a large ceiling for this team, even though we've only seen them a couple times. Would you agree, Brendan?
I think they're a top 10 team. I'll say that right now. This is only Adam Nightingale's second season. So, yeah, it's taken a little bit of time, but still, he's way ahead of track of where I expected him to be in year two. I mean, they just missed the NCAA tournament, which is just the top 16 teams in the country make the NCAA tournament. He just missed it last year, and I'm just going to say this year. I think I think it's kind of going to be an NCAA tournament or bust this season. If they can make it, I think mission accomplished. and we'll see what happens from there, because it's all about who's hot at the right time, similar to March Madness on the basketball side. So if they can make the tournament, see what happens then I think it'll be a successful season for Michigan State hockey.
All right, guys. I think that is all that we have for today. Covered quite a few different things. I will have a preview episode for the Michigan game coming up this weekend. That'll go sometime this week with someone from the opposing side. Subscribe to Spartans Illustrated. We're putting out a lot of good stuff right now. Football, basketball coming up, and the coaching search that Brendan and I touched on in our episode last week. We'll have more information there as things continue to come out. Thanks so much, Paul and Brendan, for joining. Even though we had some technical difficulties, I think we covered a lot of good stuff, and we'll be back for another recap. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to jinx it. We'll be back for another recap after the game on Saturday. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can find this podcast if you're interested in just the audio version wherever you listen. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye.
And you're still a little frozen.
Can you hear me now?
Did we lose Sydney?
Uh-oh.
Seems bad to lose the host, right?
I know. Now we can go rogue and talk about whatever we want.
Oh my. Oh, she's out.